Everybody, my name is Zach Gay, and I'm a senior tech consultant here at Perficient. I've been with them for a little over 4 years now, and in that time, I've completed 2 Sitecore upgrades from Sitecore 8 to Sitecore 9. And I think the word I would use to describe them is fun. They definitely weren't. This presentation is going to go into detail on what all is involved, lessons learned in each step, and I will also provide some architectural recommendations to make future upgrades easier. Disclaimer, I have not personally upgraded a solution from a non-containerized setup to one that does have containers. However, most of these things will still be applicable to those upgrades that involve that. So I'll say feel free to speak up during the presentation with questions or with your own personal experiences with the upgrade process, because every solution is unique. Therefore, every solution kind of has its own unique upgrade path that you might want to take. So without further ado, let's move on to talking about why someone would even consider doing an upgrade in the first place. Sitecore support for older versions ends eventually, so that's a big one. A very important perk you will want to keep alive is the ability to open up support tickets whenever you need them. And as you can see here on the right, mainstream support lasts for 3 years post release. So the level of support decreases as time goes on. Keeping your site up to date with a newer version of Sitecore will help by providing you with the best possible support that Sitecore can provide. Also, with newer versions of Sitecore comes, you guessed it, new features. These new features may be very beneficial for your company. For example, Sitecore 9 comes with Sitecore Forms. And if you don't know what that is, it's a very easy drag and drop form creation tool. Content authors not have to get any assistance from developers to use this tool. So also, newer versions of Sitecore come out with external authentication support with your Azure AD. Gone are the days where a content author will have to remember both their Sitecore account and their company login information. They can just use Azure Active Directory or Shibboleth or whatever a company uses for their AD. And I think features like that will make IT administrators very happy. They won't have to go into the back end of Sitecore and unlock accounts for people who forgot their passwords or got locked out. They just have to deal with their actual AD provider as opposed to Sitecore. On top of this, newer versions of Sitecore provide support for newer tech such as XXA and JSS. So if your company's developers may be better suited for Sitecore development with JavaScript rather than the old-fashioned .NET full stack development pattern, upgrading to a newer version that supports the ability to use primarily JavaScript would be really helpful for your team. Also, Sitecore 9 onwards will be optimized for the cloud on Azure PaaS. The typical benefits of an Azure PaaS solution apply here. So deployments for production environments can be much safer due to the ability to perform blue-green deployments. There's guaranteed uptime from Azure, and automated deployments are nice. You don't want to stay up in the middle of the night having to do a deployment while there's no users on the site. It's nice to have that peace of mind using Azure to support your site. And sorry about my cat there. She is deciding to be part of the presentation. So now that we've covered why someone might want to upgrade, let's talk about what all is involved with the Sitecore upgrade. So Sitecore provides documentation on how to upgrade to each version. Simply navigate to the Sitecore downloads page for the version you're upgrading to. For example, the instructions for upgrading to Sitecore 9.3 are seen here on the right screenshot. It is important to note that you do not go to the Sitecore downloads page for the current version of Sitecore you are on. You need to go to the version that you're upgrading to find the right database upgrade instructions. the more versions of Sitecore you're upgrading past, the more likely you'll be to have to perform multiple database upgrades. For example, upgrading from Sitecore 7 to Sitecore 10 will require you to upgrade to some intermediate version between the two. However, sometimes you don't have to do that. If you're upgrading from Sitecore 8.1.3 to Sitecore 9.2, for example, you only have to jump one hoop to upgrade your database. It's a straight shot from those two versions. To get some practice with this upgrade process, I recommend doing a dry run on your local machine. Install a fresh instance of the Sitecore version that you're currently on, and then run through the upgrade instructions. If you ever, when you were younger, read through a choose your own adventure novel where you have to flip to different pages in the book after making certain decisions, I think that's a good example of what the upgrade instructions are like. So it has branching paths based on what your solution is set up as. So I recommend doing this dry run and writing down the exact steps that you take, so you don't have to go back to the instructions again and try to make those branching decisions as you're going through it officially. Also, a tip that I have for this is that when you do a dry run, install Sitecore to a very, very short file path, like C drive/A, for example. The upgrade process can make really long file path names temporarily as it's running through the upgrade, and Windows doesn't like long file path names. Also, another thing that I made a terrible mistake of doing myself was running the upgrade process on an Azure hosted database. It is painfully slow. You'll want to pull down a copy of the database and then upgrade it. This also brings me to my next point. Do not run through this upgrade process on currently active or live in-use databases. Calling this in-place upgrades. So when I say in-place upgrades, I mean running the upgrade steps on the databases currently in use. So if the upgrade process fails, your site's down. And if you do this in the production environment, then you're going to be losing your online presence and potentially revenue. So it's not worth losing revenue over. So let's not do that. So how do we get around this? I recommend standing up separate servers and databases specifically for upgrading. After the upgrade is complete, flip the switch and point all internet traffic to your new servers. However, this begs the question, how do you get your custom curated content onto the upgraded databases? I recommend two routes here that you can take to solving the problem, and it's based on your situation, whichever is better for you. So route one involves using packages, Sitecore Sidekick, and PowerShell to move content from the currently in-use environment and moving it to your separate servers. This can be somewhat error-prone because if you accidentally skip moving certain pieces, then certain pieces of content is going to fail on your site. So you have to be extra careful here with that route. Route two involves pointing your separate server to a current copy of your databases and then running through these upgrade steps that Sitecore provides. This will ensure that you're not skipping any custom content. However, it does take longer than route one because you're having to run through all those upgrade steps. I personally like standing up fresh databases that are of a SQL version that is compatible with the version of Sitecore you're moving to, and moving the custom content over rather than running through the upgrade steps. Also, it's important to note that both routes, regardless of what you take, there's going to be a content freeze of some kind. So you'll need to make note of when you're stopping content creation and running through the upgrade process, making sure your content authors are informed of the content freeze so that they don't make any content that doesn't make it over during the upgrade. If you don't do a content freeze, then you'll need to keep track of when you are starting the upgrade and then grabbing all of the content that was created after you ran the upgrade process on a cutoff copy of the database, and then migrate that stuff over. You'll also have to do Sitecore.config Patching. You'll want to move all of the custom settings in the Sitecore.config file into patch files. So to do this, I recommend downloading a text compare tool like Beyond Compare. And then after that, download the old version's Sitecore config and do a text compare with the configuration found at your live site's show config page. So to make that a little more clear, make sure you get the vanilla untouched Sitecore config of the old version you're on. So then you'll want to compare that with the live Sitecore config file that's in use on your site. And then on Beyond Compare or whatever text compare tool you use, you'll see the differences and what has been manually added to the Sitecore config file. After you do that, grab all of those changes and create one large patch file that you can just apply to the new upgraded instance. If your goal is to get through the upgrade process as fast as possible, use the one large patch file. And then later on, you may want to separate all of these setting changes to separate patch files just to be a little cleaner, or what's the word here? Find a better location for the settings and where they should live in your solution. After Sitecore config patching, you'll also need to make some dependency injection updates to your code. I recommend that you stop using third-party tools for dependency injection like Castle Windsor and Simple Injector, and you convert to using .NET's dependency injection tool. And I don't have much to say here because the Microsoft's documentation on their DI tool is very good. It's very easy to follow along, and in my opinion, I like it more than the third-party tools. So just be aware you're going to have to update how you're doing dependency injection. Here's probably where I consider most of your time will go into, and it's the code updates. First, you will need to update the .NET target framework of your projects to the appropriate version. And Sitecore has like a giant table of all of the things that it's compatible with, and then in that table is what version of .NET is compatible with the version that you're upgrading to. Simply just Google search Sitecore compatibility table. So after updating the target framework, you'll then need to connect to the Sitecore NuGet feed and uninstall the current Sitecore NuGet packages. Then install the new Sitecore NuGet packages using the version that is compatible with the new version of Sitecore you're upgrading to. After upgrading the NuGet references, you'll then need to peruse through your code to make sure that your Sitecore API calls and implementations are still supported by the new version of Sitecore. If not, you're going to have to adjust your code accordingly in order for your site to function like it did pre-upgrade. I would also take the time to make sure any of the projects don't have references to the older version of Sitecore in them. This happens when someone sneakily has installed the Sitecore NuGet packages not through the NuGet package manager in Visual Studio. You'll want to make sure that no one manually did that, because if you try to deploy the solution, it's going to have conflicting Sitecore versions in there, and it's going to have some issues trying to boot up on your local. So if you do find these references, simply remove them and then install them via the NuGet package manager so that the next time you go through an upgrade, you won't have to worry about having to find those sneaky additions. You'll also have to follow very similar steps to updating non-Sitecore dependencies. However, some of your dependencies may not have a NuGet package version that is compatible with your new version of Sitecore. So what do you do then? You have a few options. Some of them are bad options, but they're options nonetheless. You can wait to do your upgrade process until the NuGet package is available. However, this may never come if that dependency is no longer being maintained. Even if it is being maintained, it may not be available at the time or within the time that you need to, that you were given to complete the upgrade. So that option, kind of bad. So this leaves us with two other options. You have the option to download the current version of the dependency that you're on and make it compatible with the new version of Sitecore yourself. Or the final, I would say nuclear, I'm gonna put this in parentheses, very, very nuclear option is completely removing the dependency and implementing your own code to perform its functionality. I don't think that final option is absolutely necessary. However, it does depend on the solution and what you're trying to do. So updating the dependency yourself will likely be the path you have to take if a NuGet package is no longer being maintained or it's not going to be updated fast enough for you. So all of this to say, this brings me to kind of my main architectural recommendation to making future Sitecore upgrades easier. And we'll harken back to when I mentioned going away from the third-party dependency injection tools. I have the same message here. Lessen your reliance on third-party code as much as you can. The less third-party dependencies you have, the less you have to deal with all of these issues I just talked about, with sneaky installs or it just not being compatible with your new version of Sitecore. Third-party tools are out of your control. They can change drastically, thus causing your upgrade path to be that much harder. One particular third-party tool we will talk about that is prevalent in a lot of solutions, at least in the ones that I have upgraded, is the use of an ORM, in particular Glass Mapper. When upgrading your solution that makes use of an ORM, you'll have two paths forward. Get rid of it or upgrade it. In an ideal world, it would be a no-brainer to want to upgrade the ORM to keep all of your implementations intact with little updating. Also, in an ideal world, all solutions are architected well, thus making upgrading Glass Mapper or whatever ORM you're using very straightforward. Unfortunately, at least in my opinion, maybe I'm a pessimist, maybe I'm not. We're not in that ideal world. The newer version of the ORM may remove methods it previously supported, and your code base may require some serious updating to work around these now obsolete functions. And I'm going to give you some examples. The changes between Glass Mapper 4 and Glass Mapper 5 are significant. The Glass controller no longer exists in Glass Mapper 5. So if all of your controllers are dependent upon using this controller, or you even have other dependencies of your own code that you wrote that is dependent upon this controller, you will need to find a workaround. Other changes, such as the removal of the isLazy decorator, could call for sweeping changes throughout your code, especially for components that required auto mapping of tons of child items. The point I'm trying to make here is that upgrading an ORM may not even be worth your time. Even after upgrading your code to successfully compile using the upgraded ORM code, you will then have to heavily test your sites, ensuring the site's behavior is still the same as before. Troubleshooting and diagnosing the issues attributed to your ORM can also be very difficult, especially if you're a person who is new to Sitecore and you're placed on a Sitecore upgrade if you're in a consulting agency. Glass may be something entirely new. So upgrading Sitecore and then also upgrading Glass or an ORM, you may not know, is this error because of Sitecore or is this error because of Glass? You can argue that once you have more experience, you may be better at upgrading an ORM and maybe less painful, but I feel like in my experience, I have ran into some crazy weird issues that I didn't know where to source them from. So In my opinion, this headache can be avoided by removing your solutions dependency on an ORM entirely. It may seem like a tall order. After all, it would require updating every component to get rid of its reliance on it. However, I would argue that once you get the development pattern down of how to strip it out of one component, it becomes very easy, mindless work to plow through. So on top of this, removing the ORM now during this upgrade process will make future upgrades even easier, because then it's one less consideration you have to take when you're doing the next upgrade. It also prevents having to wade through obscure ORM configuration issues, like I said. So if the ORM upgrade is going to require a lot of code rewrite, why not just go ahead and bite the bullet and do the code rewrite with a very easy, mindless way of doing it without having to overthink your solution and figure out ORM issues. So I understand this seems rather extreme, but I would say let's take a look at a small snippet here to see really how much work it is to do it on a simple component. So what we see here is using Glass Mapper. A nice benefit of an ORM is that it allows you to map content author data on an item to a strongly typed C# object very easily. In this snippet, we are getting for free, basically, the title, text, and description properties with what the content author populated in Sitecore on this C# object. It's very simple. You just say MVC context, get my data source item, and you cast it to your Glass object. Now, let's take a look at how we can do this without an ORM. All we would have to do is retrieve the values manually using the Sitecore API. You can assign those values to properties on the model to make your own strongly typed model if you so choose. Very easy, in my opinion. However, like I said earlier, this would require a lot of code rewrite. So like here, it was just one line to get all three properties for title, text, description. However, in a post-ORM world, it would be 3 lines instead of 1 to get the values for each of those fields. However, I think it's very easy to do this. Sitecore API is a little more persistent, I think. The methods it has will still exist in future Sitecore versions, at least simple methods like this, where it's just retrieving the field values on Sitecore items. So I would say this mundane, busy work right now during the upgrade process is worth it. Oops, went too far. A little spoiler alert there. There's some search changes coming up. So back to my earlier point. It may also seem like it's difficult to replace the ORM's helper methods in the view to make fields editable. However, it's really not difficult at all. I recommend employing custom edit frames, custom experience buttons, or Sitecore's HTML helpers. You can also make your model properties be of type iHTML string and pass them into the view to maintain their editability. My first upgrade was 3 years ago, and that was when I knew Sitecore the least. And as a newbie at the time, I didn't know that the Glass helpers in the view were easily replaceable. I figured they would be very difficult, and in all actuality, it really isn't. So I recommend. I personally like custom edit frames and stuff like that. So if I could persuade you to move towards that, I think it's a good paradigm to set in your solution is to add an edit frame button to every single component. So that, yeah, there's inline editing. You can still allow that, but I like how clean the custom experience buttons are. That's unrelated to the upgrade though. So let's keep moving. The last part of the upgrade process I'm going to talk about is the search provider changes. If you're keeping the same search provider, your code shouldn't have to change much, if at all. All you'll have to do is stand up the newer version of the search provider that is compatible with the new version of Sitecore that you're going to. If you're changing search providers, however, that's where the effort comes in. If you're going from Lucene to Solar, you will need to write up your Solar config files. They're very similar to Lucene, but they are different. If you're using the content search API in your C# code, there should be minimal changes there when you're going from Lucene to Solar. What you need to watch out for when switching search providers is to make sure the new search provider supports all of the features your site needs. On one of my upgrades, the site required Chinese language support, and Lucene had this out of the box with the old version that they were on. However, Solar 6.6.2 did not. So I had to implement the support myself. Thankfully, later versions of Solar provide Chinese language support out of the box, but it's something to keep in mind. Make sure all of the features are there that you need, and if it doesn't, you'll need to think of a way around that, or potentially even lose support for it. And I don't think that's the right move there. So you'll need to figure out an upgrade path to get all the features you need. I would recommend against switching to Azure Search, as we all know, it's being deprecated in newer versions of Sitecore. However, I have seen it in use a good bit in Sitecore 9. There's just so many complications. If you're a consultant and a client is coming to you really adamant about it, you really need to talk about the challenges they're going to run into if they do switch to Azure Search. It comes with a lot of complexities, like the 1,000 field limit, that are just not fun to deal with at all. It's also super expensive. I say stick with Solar or work through with Coveo or SearchStacks or Solar Managed Cloud. I think all of those options are infinitely better than Azure Search. Stay away from it. Big warning, please stay away. I don't want to upgrade any projects with Azure Search. They're just not fun. It makes the upgrade process even harder. So to wrap things up, let's talk about how long an upgrade process should take. The path to upgrading your solution is unique. So listed here is how long each phase will likely take, where one sprint is 2 weeks. The estimations here are for jumping major Sitecore versions with large code bases. So let's go through what it would be like for a large code base, and then we can talk about why this may seem like an exaggeration for smaller solutions. So at the beginning of an upgrade, you want to spend 2 weeks, I would say, making decisions on how you will do the upgrade. This investigation phase should include what dependencies you want to remove/upgrade, what your infrastructure will look like, etc. You will also need to spend at least 2 sprints to set up your infrastructure and deal with the myriad of user access issues that you'll run into, whitelisting IPs and making sure servers can communicate with each other, and all of those sorts of fun issues. Your investigation phase will determine whether you're retaining your current infrastructure, shifting to Azure PaaS, shifting to SaaS, or even moving to containerized environments. Oops. I should learn to not scroll in the middle of a presentation. You will also want to have test users go into the site to find bugs once the upgraded solution is deployed. If you are not working at the company that you're doing the upgrade for, you're contracted out, you don't know how the site should function. All you care about is getting the upgraded solution out there and making sure content authors are happy and that your client is happy. So these test users should be people who are experienced with the old version of the site, so they can tell you, hey, this is acting different than it did before. Is this a byproduct of a new version, or is this a bug that we introduced with the upgrade process? If you're switching search providers for your solution, you should tack on another sprint or two to your timeline. All in all, I would probably suggest a 4-month period to have a completely successful upgrade with bugs ironed out. However, jumping smaller Sitecore versions with no significant code base changes can be completed in as little time as 1 to 2 sprints. It's really hard to prescribe a one-size-fits-all time estimate for all solutions, so that's why having an investigation phase is so crucial. I haven't personally done an upgrade in a containerized environment, but I hear it's so much easier to just load up a new image and you upgrade your .NET frameworks in your code base and it's good to go. But if you're upgrading from an much older solution, you're gonna have to increase your time estimates here. So I've written up a whole mini series on this that includes even more notes. So if I couldn't convince you to remove your ORM, that's totally fine. I have upgraded a solution in the past where I kept the ORM, ended up being worth the effort of learning those obscurities that I ran into, simply because the solution was so large. Upgrading the glass instantiation ended up being easier, but in the future, I would like to not personally upgrade it again. But hats off to the ORM creators. Like it's really good stuff, and please don't take it as slander. Take it as I am a disgruntled person who has not had fun doing upgrades on solutions that needed some help with architectural guidance. So I think if the solutions were a little better and didn't get out of control, then upgrading glass is a no-brainer, like I said earlier. So in this blog series, I include a glass replacement controller should you choose to keep the ORM. I also include more tips and tricks or pain points that I ran into and how to avoid them. And that's it for my presentation. Thanks for attending. I guess I'll open the floor to any questions or comments or debates even.
Hello, this was a quick question. So in upgrading, one of the things I'm thinking about is like your personalization XDB data. Was that as simple as running through and updating your databases, or were there any issues or extra things you had to go through to make sure that that information was still available?
Yeah. So there's a few options you can do there. If you're having a lot of analytic data, some clients have moved on to not using Sitecore's analytics, and they just use other tools to do this for them. So when I upgraded one of them, they were fine with just forgetting that data. That's not the case for everyone. So the upgrade instructions themselves include how to upgrade the XDB data. So if you were standing up fresh databases in the current version of Sitecore that you're going to, you could still run through the upgrade process and update the analytics databases so that you have those, and then you just connect your upgraded Sitecore instance to the fresh master, the fresh web databases, but you also point that new version of Sitecore to your upgraded databases using the upgraded instructions for the analytics databases. I believe there's also a data migrator for XDB data that I personally haven't used. So if anyone on this call has used that, I'd be curious to hear your experiences with it.
I mean, I've done some migration when it was MongoDB and coming back into Sitecore, but I was just wondering in your case, it sounds like, well, for one of them, that wasn't even an issue. Just like if it's a Sitecore to Sitecore, how easy that would be if it's just a matter of following the instructions and updating the databases. I've just found always following the instructions, there's a lot that's always left out when it comes to Sitecore. So was just wondering if you had any experience or any knowledge around that.
Definitely no in-place upgrades. Definitely don't do that. But I found the instructions provided by Sitecore in the upgrade process to be very straightforward and effective. You just have to be very careful to not accidentally skip a step. So even if you were going to connect to fresh databases for the other ones, like Web and CM or Web and Master, you still would want to run through the upgrade process for all of the databases just to make sure you didn't skip something that is needed, even if you aren't connecting to the databases that you're running the upgrade through. So.
Thank you.
Cool, good question.
Any more questions? Zach, what would be your advice on the XDB migrations? Like, did you get a chance to work on them, or?
In a sense of just running through the upgrade steps, nothing beyond that though. One client kept it, one client decided just to start fresh.
Okay, luckily in my case, I was in the second stage. Client didn't want to spend a lot on time on the migration of the XDB alone. So we ended up just having an old instance just without the XDB migration part.
Yeah, it really depends on the client that you're helping. If they have a lot of personalized data and they need to know how people behave on their site, then yeah, it's going to be a process, some time there to get that over. But if it's like an internal tool, I feel like half the time clients will be like, we don't even looking at this anyway. So.
Okay.
Cool. I know Sitecore upgrades are not a fun topic. That's why I hope to enlighten or spread the good word of how to make it less painful. Yeah, so you don't have to do it for a long time. Make the upgrade path as painless as possible, and then you can forget that you had to do it.
We wish.
Yeah.
Make that way. Yeah. And I think one another thing I want to add, when we were doing the migration, we were doing to 9. I believe the version of .NET was not right, like listed right. So I was struggling with, it's a new environment 4.7. I think the .NET framework is 4.7.1. But in the website it was mentioned, I think 4.7.2, but site it was mentioned 4.7.1. The .NET framework was a mismatch, so that was something. I just trusted and went with that, and things did not work. And other thing we noticed is about the hot fixes.
Yeah, there isn't like a list anymore of like what hot fixes you need to apply.
Not anymore with 9+, yeah, but
yeah, you'll definitely, I would suggest just opening a support ticket when you're getting through your upgrade, just to say, hey, I'm moving to this version. Do you have any hot fix recommendations? And I'm sure they'll provide like a a one giant hotfix package, or at least the lists of things that you have to have.
Yeah, I think in our case it was like we had like 7 hotfixes with the version 8, and then when we moved to 9, 2 or 3 were fixed already, part of the platform things, and certain things were specific to this environment. So they gave us a couple of hot fixes. They said, hey, just go unzip this and run the script or something like that, which also helped.
Yeah, kind of the age-old joke with coders, is like, oh, you miss one semicolon and your code's ruined. But you have one target framework messed up in one of your projects, or you have one dependency that's wrong because you forgot to uninstall it, or it deployed and then you changed it in your solution but didn't remove the deployed DLL. You're going to have issues. And you're like, what? It's not in my solution anymore, but you did accidentally deploy it already. So there's just so many of those issues that I think the first time you ever do an upgrade, it's mind-boggling. But
yeah, once you do it, then you get the hang of it.
Yeah, and you kind of know what to anticipate going in. I think for me, I found it very overwhelming at first because I got very discouraged with the upgrade process, and I was like, man, do I not know Sitecore? Or this is terrible. Maybe it's me, but I think you'll see so many yellow screens of death or yellow error screens all the time during the upgrade process, and that's normal. You just have to work through each issues. You don't know exactly what issues you're going to run into in an upgrade process, so you may have to kind of regroup and change your path as you're working through it, and that's okay. There's known things you're going to run into, and there's unknown issues that you just have to be a little flexible with dealing with, and you're not going to know that you're going to run into them, and that's okay.